الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا ماكثين فيه أبدا وينذر الذين قالوا اتخذ الله ولدا ما لهم به من علم ولا لآبائهم كبرت كلمة تخرج من أفواههم إن يقولون إلا كذبا فلعلك باخع نفسك على آثارهم إن لم يؤمنوا بهذا الحديث أسفا إنا جعلنا ما على الأرض زينة لها لنبلوهم أيهم أحسن عملا وإنا لجاعلون ما عليها صعيدا جرزا أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا ثم بعثناهم لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى لما لبثوا أمدا نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا هؤلاء قومنا اتخذوا من دونه آلهة لولا يأتون عليهم بسلطان بين فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا وإذ اعتزلتموهم وما يعبدون إلا الله فأووا فأووا إلى الكهف ينشر لكم ربكم من رحمته فأووا إلى الكهف ينشر لكم ربكم من رحمته ويهيئ لكم من أمركم مرفقا وترى الشمس إذا طلعت
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أدعوك كما أمرتني فاستجب لي كما وعدتني إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم يا دائم الفضل على البرية يا باسط اليدين بالعطية يا صاحب المواهب السنية صل على محمد وآله خير الورى سجيا واغفر لنا يا ذا العلام في هذه العشية. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصابة. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقاب. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعايم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك وكرمك أن تدنيني من كربك وأن توزعني شكرا وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضعين متذللين خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني من قسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته وكم من عثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أمام مالي
وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بخيانتها ومطال يا ماما سيدي. فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملت في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت في هوى نفسي ولم أحترس في من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي في قضاؤك، وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعض تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري، اللهم فاقبل وارحم شدة دري وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي، يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي. هبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعض من طوى علي قلبي من معرفتك ولهج بي لساني من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعض صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من آويته أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيت ورحمته. وليت الشعر يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرات لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا. إلهي لطالما هذه الوجوه سجدت من خشيتك ولطالما هذه العيون بكيت من مخافتك. حاشا ما لوجهك الكريم أن تحرق في النار. كيف لا وهي سجدت في ليلة الجمعة أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر حويت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعيت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعا وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنايا. ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا ربي. وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكث يسير بقاء قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي. فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي. لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي. أليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائي وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك فبعزتك يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفتك وضاق طعم عذابها بمعصيتك وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوتهم وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وهو يناديك يا رب أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقا أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب يا رب أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين يقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك، وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كانت لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماء أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد في المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك كلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها أن تهب لي وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة جميعا كل جرم أجرمتم وكل ذنب أذنبتم وكل قبيح وكل جهل كتمته أو أعلنتم، أخفيتم أو أظهرتم، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي. يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بدري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من علي معولين يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وأخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأريد اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأريد جميعا اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء ومن كادني فكيت واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجدني بجودك وعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي وغفير زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة جميعا فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي سريع الرضا يا سريع يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملكه إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دوام وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنايا ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء يا سابغ النعايم يا دافع النقام يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بي ما أنا أهله وصل اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولاستجابة الدعاء ولقضاء الحوائج ولشفاء المرضى ولقبول الأعمال إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات لا سيما أموات الحاضرين رحم الله يقرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مشفوعة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
Ahsan to Brother Hassan for that beautiful recitation. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to part 3 in our Dua Kumayl lecture series titled Introduction to Islamic Psychology. Inshallah, in just a short while we'll welcome Sheikh Zuhair Ismail to start his lecture on the iceberg theory of Islamic psychology. Again, brothers and sisters, without your generosity, these programs cannot run. So we do have the donation link. I've sent it on the LYF community group. We also have the machine outside and a cash box. So, inshallah, any little helps. So, without further ado, please welcome Sheikh Zuhair with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Firstly, it behoves me to congratulate you all on the wilada of Sayyidah Zahra, salamu alayha. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Alhamdulillah, in the last couple of weeks, we have managed to areas. In the first lecture, I talked about some of the terms and set some examples of what is covered in Islamic psychology that might be slightly different from psychology itself. In the second lecture, we took a look at one of the earliest treatises in Islamic psychology. We unfortunately did not get enough time to get through the whole of that treatise, but afterwards, especially among the brothers, we got to open up some of the other parts of it as well Again, my recommendation is to very much take that treatise on board and take a look at it. It's only about 30 pages in English, and the translation is available quite easily. I had a very interesting question after the program. Someone said to me that, many of the strategies that I heard you mention in the part that you talked about in the lecture, those are quite obvious to me. They seem to be something that I would do. And that came from a person who was more experienced, maybe slightly older, been through things in life, and had thereby learnt many things in life. And that, I think, is actually a testament to how good that treatise is. That treatise encapsulates wisdom that you learn over time. So if you're able to take that wisdom at an early age, then it will set you up for the difficulties that are to come ahead. And of course, one of the key characteristics that Al-Balkhi was talking about was that it's good to surround yourself with people that are wise about these issues, because when you yourself find that your emotions are out of control or your analysis of the situation is somehow hampered, you will listen to the people that make sense. So it could be something you already know. So for example, you might know you shouldn't have a crazy outburst. Okay? You might know that. But in the situation, it might be hard not to have that outburst. So you need people around you that will reconfirm what you already know. So I just wanted to share that as well, because that was a good insight that I feel brought that together. Today we are going to look at a solid theory. It's the iceberg theory of Islamic psychology. And this all starts out with understanding what we're talking about when we talk about an iceberg. So the iceberg theory is something that is spoken about in psychology in general. Now, what is it about an iceberg that serves as a good illustration for psychology? Well, if you look at this picture, you might notice a few things. The first thing that you will notice from this picture is that there is a part of the iceberg that is above the water and a part of the iceberg that is below the water. Usually when you're sailing on a ship, you will not see what is below the water. You will see what is above the water. And that is supposed to be an example of how we see each other. When we see each other, what we see is above the water. But what else of that person that we don't see is what lies below the water. And that is why the iceberg is larger underneath the water than it is on the surface. So what are the kind of things that would be above the water? Things like a person's style. Things like a person's facial expression. Things like behaviors that we see regularly. Okay? Those are the kind of things that will be above the water level in the iceberg. What would be things that would be below the iceberg? Things like feelings, like past experiences, like triggers, like traumas. All of these things make up what we don't see about a person. So what the illustration does immediately is it shows us that there's an outward aspect to a personality and an inward aspect to the personality. And that these two are connected. Okay? Our sense of style tells us many things about a person's personality. In the same way, the way we will react in a situation tells us many things about what is going on with it. But the interesting thing about an iceberg when it comes to a person is that while for the external world there is a certain water level, so there's only certain things other people will recognize about you from the outside, for each and every person, the water level itself is lower. You know more about yourself than other people know, in summary. But that doesn't mean that there is more about yourself that you're unaware, that you're not aware of. So while you may be in touch at times with your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions, and maybe some of your past experiences and so on and so forth, there is actually a whole wealth to a person that is sometimes beyond their actual grasp. In fact, the way we understand the soul in Islam is the soul is something that is so vast that the epistemological tools that we have, like our mind, like our heart, they are not vast enough to actually understand the depths of the soul. When it comes onto a human being, there are parts of the soul that we comprehend and parts of the soul that we don't comprehend. So this is the basic model. Now, how can we move towards an Islamic version of this model? This was proposed by a scholar called Abdullah Ruthman in one of his most recent books. I think this book is actually 2023, maybe 22, 23. This is what he proposes for an iceberg model of Islamic psychology, which then can be used in psychotherapy. And he uses terms here that you might have seen before. The first term is the nafs. Okay? The nafs, or the vital self, is what we'll talk about in a little bit of detail today. The second is the aql, or the intellect. The third is the qalb, and the fourth is the ruh. These are four aspects of the soul that we can use to understand what is going on within a person. And there's a couple of points about this diagram before we look at it in detail. The first thing is to do with the ruh. The ruh is something that is not well known to us. We don't understand all of the facets of the ruh. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has breathed into us a ruh. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. And I breathed within him from my ruh. Of course, Allah doesn't have a ruh. This connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to show how blessed and how great the ruh is. Just like when we talk about the Kaaba, it's called the Bayt of Allah, or the house of Allah. It's not because Allah has a house. It is because that place is so blessed and so great in the eyes of Allah that He attributes it to Himself. So the ruh as well, it has this station. But the ruh is something that we can't fully grasp. It is something that is beyond our grasp entirely. And that is why it's there at the bottom of the iceberg. And it connects here with what I'm saying in the sense that there are only certain things we know about ourselves. There is, of course, more to talk about that in the sense that what the limitations of our own faculties are and what the extent of our soul is, because our soul is supposed to be eternal as well. And eternal means not temporal, but that is its own area. So that's the first point. The first point is that the lowest level of this iceberg is the ruh, and the ruh is not completely in our grasp. The other thing to know about this is that the nafs is above the water level. Okay? If you remember, what I said is that above the water level is something that is apparent, and below the water level is something that is not apparent. Here, the reason why the nafs is above the water level is because this model is for you as a person or for someone who is actually practicing psychotherapy. So for you, your nafs is something that you can be aware of, such that it is not hidden to you. Yeah, and also for someone who is trying to help you with that discussion of your nafs, they should also be able to understand the nafs from their session with you. But as we start to move below the water level, there is the aql and the qalb. So what is the nafs? I'm hoping many of you have heard of different models of the nafs, or at least heard of the nafs. There are two key models in Islamic literature when we talk about the nafs. The nafs essentially talks about the very basic pulls and the very basic forces of any human being. And this is the first model I'm going to show you. It is one that, like I said, is very, very widespread in the Islamic intellectual tradition. When Mullah Sadra comes on to explaining the human development, he starts out by saying that when a child is born, the first force that appears within them is desire. Desire, as you see here, is a force. It's a pulling force. A force that will pull benefit towards yourself. So the child knows that it needs to benefit from milk, it needs to benefit from comfort, and it will cry and make a fuss if it doesn't have these things. Okay, so it will, that motivating desire within them is something that will then affect their behavior such that they will pull those things towards them. So it's a pulling force. Obviously, it's not bad. It's a good thing. If a baby doesn't feel a sense of desire and doesn't call out for milk or comfort when it needs, then it will not continue to survive because it would not draw attention to that need. Okay, so the desire is a good thing. To realize that there is a need there and to pull that benefit towards themselves is a good thing. The next thing that develops within a child, and for those of you that have children, you will know what happens at the age of 2. It's called terrible 2s. Yeah? And then you will also know what happens at 4. It's called horrible 4s. And for those of you who are not parents yet, in between the age of 3, there's nothing different. It doesn't stop between 2 and 3. It carries on the whole way. What happens at this stage is that within a child, they build a sense of anger. They start to have tantrums. Yeah? They start to demand what they want in a very different way from the kind of innocent way as when they were little babies. And the force of anger is a pushing force. Okay? It's supposed to push away harm. And this is why you'll notice that many times when you are trying to protect someone or when you're worried about something, you will react with anger. Because anger, like it says here, is the force that makes you push away harm. So for example, if somebody is walking down the road and they're about to get run over, okay, we will shout out to them or we'll pull them hard away from that danger. Okay, because what we want to do is deflect harm. Or conversely, sometimes, if we come home, for example, from work and we're very, very tired, and we see that the housework has not been done, for example, or the house is a complete mess, and perhaps there was someone at home that could have tidied up the mess, we will start to feel annoyed, okay, and angry. The reason we feel angry is because we feel that there's going to be another job on our plate. And so we react to that with anger. We try and push away that harm from our sense that we need to relax, for example, in the moment. And if you think about these two forces, these are the key forces. One pulling force, one pushing force. If you think about this in all the different times and situations in life, you will find that most of what is going on within a person can be summarized in one of these two things. Either desire, either in a positive way or in not such a positive way. Okay? A pushing force and a pulling force. Now the next thing to develop inside a child is the third one, imagination. So what you find is that after a little while, you can start to, talk about fantasy stories and other things to do with the imagination, things like counting and numbers and more abstract things as they grow up. Okay? And the imagination is a multiplying force. Again, it is not bad inherently. It is something that is good inherently. In fact, what the philosophers say is that if we didn't have imagination, we wouldn't be able to find our way home. Because whenever we go somewhere, in order to find our way back, we have to recall all of the images that we took along the way and put them in reverse order. And we can only do that with an imagination. Without an imagination, you can't do that. But imagination is a multiplying force. And of course, as we know, when it is mixed with either desire and anger, it can amplify these forces. Okay? So for example, say you're hungry and you start looking at pictures of food. Nowadays, It's almost like Instagram knows when you're hungry, right? You get these videos all with, delicious places to eat and things like that. What happens is that you have the desire to pull the benefit towards you, which is hunger. But then with the extra stimuli, what happens is that your imagination also plays into that situation. Yeah? And you can imagine having something really great. You go to the same place that is advertised in the store and it ends up being not as good as you thought it would be. Or the same thing with anger. If someone angers you, many times, if your thoughts after that were put into a serial, you could probably make a 5-episode series of the intricacy of the crime that you're about to carry out on that person, right? Our imagination can multiply and take out of context all of these basic forces. Okay, so imagination, which is a multiplying force. Now, these 3 forces are the forces of the nafs. Everything that we are motivated to do, either in a good way or a bad way, comes from these 3. It is good when it is consistent with our ethical religious responsibilities. And it is not good when it oversteps those boundaries. Okay, so desire is good, but within certain limitations. When desire overwhelms, that is when it becomes bad. So for example, say you have a desire to do well at work. Okay? Essentially, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But if you're doing well at work means that you will therefore put down or sabotage other people, that's obviously out of the bounds. Okay? Same with anger. Your anger to protect your children, for example, is a good thing. But if protecting your children involves harming another child, that would be a bad thing. Okay? Your imagination is important for your creativity. But if your imagination takes you towards a sin, it is obviously a bad thing. And that is why these forces all need a balancing force. And that is what the intellect is. And that is the last thing to come into the domain of a human being. And it is something that comes in gradually. The intellect doesn't come in perfected right at the beginning. It is something that comes in gradually and grows over time. Until a person reaches 40, that's where the intellect matures. Okay? So this balancing force, what is the point of this force? It is to put the other 3 in the correct balance. Okay? So for the model of the soul, if you remember going back to the iceberg, the nafs that is on the top of the iceberg, to understand that we need to understand these 3 fundamental forces. Okay? Now sometimes what I do when I'm teaching these is I put scenarios. I give you a scenario and you think about how to label what's happening within your soul with these 3 issues. Okay? So what I would recommend is that in your day-to-day life, as you're going through things, keep these in mind. Keep your pulling force in mind, pushing force in mind, and multiplying force in mind. And as you are thinking about and reflecting what has happened, you can actually put labels on them. You can say this is coming from desire, this is coming from anger, this is coming from imagination. And then figure out how to use the intellect to rebalance all of those. A simple example of a scenario, one of the scenarios that I sometimes give, is that you're called into the office at work and the manager tells you that there's going to be job cuts. That's it. That's the scenario. What goes through your mind? Where are the forces? What are your motivations at that point? All of those things, if you can label them and understand them, you will understand how your nafs is working. And then you'll understand what you have to do with your intellect. Now, keep this model in mind. This is the first one. I'm going to explain one more model, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an explanation of the nafs in the Quran. And hopefully you'll be able to put these 3 models together and understand this first layer, which is probably the most important layer to understand as it comes to a person's psyche, your own psyche and other people's psyche. Because once you understand your own soul, on the level of the nafs, you will also understand other people's souls. Yeah? If you remember with Al-Balkhi, what he said is that if you understand the temperament of someone and you understand the situation, you can actually predict what effects that is going to have on the person. It's the same thing with the soul. If you understand the soul, the way the soul works, and you understand what situation is facing that person, you'll understand exactly what is going through the person's soul. Now, the soul is not something that is just a mental thing. The soul is something that you feel entirely. Think about when you've been angry. Yes, there might have been thoughts in your mind, but usually you can't even concentrate on those thoughts, right? The thoughts are so mixed up, yeah? What is really happening is it's almost like your whole being is angry, yeah? That's the way your soul is. Even with desire, when you're hungry, you might not be thinking about anything, but your whole being is hungry, right? That's what your soul is. So these are the pulls in your soul. They don't have to be verbal. When you recognize desire, you can recognize it as the pulling force. That's why I call it a force. Yeah? And anger as a pushing force, and then imagination as the multiplier there. So this is model 1. Model 2, I also hope you've heard of before in some way, is again a model that is very much widespread in the Islamic intellectual tradition. And it is inspired from the Holy Quran. So these terms are taken from the Holy Quran, but as I'll show you in just a minute, they might not have been as accurately reflected as the Quranic discourse itself. So let me explain it to you. The first is called the Nafs al-Ammara. The Nafs al-Ammara is the aspect of your soul that keeps pushing you to do things that are not right. It is basically, in the cartoons, the devil on one side of you, constantly pushing you, telling you and commanding you to do things that are not right, things that are not good for you. Yeah, it doesn't have to always be sinning. Yeah, it's basically that pull towards doing things that are not good for you morally and good for you generally. Okay, that's the nafs al-ammara. It doesn't leave you alone. When you want to do something, you want to do it. Yeah, that's what the nafs al-ammara is. The nafs al-lawama, on the other hand, is the blaming soul. So that's the aspect of your soul that is your conscience. Yeah? So once you've done something, or once you're intending to do something that is not right, the nafs al-lawama will tell you, don't do that. Yeah? It's like the angel on your shoulder fighting with your devil. These two are interlocked in the combat of the self. Yeah? It's a combat because these two are always fighting. The Amara and the Lawama are always fighting. Okay? But eventually, one of them will win. Either the Amara will win or the Lawama will win. And when that happens, there's no more fighting. The soul is at rest. Yeah? And that's the last one, the Nafs al-Mutma'inna. Now, of course, in the literature, we don't want to end up at the soul at rest in the Amara. What we want to end up is at the soul at rest with the Lawama winning, the blaming soul winning. So the blaming soul is seen as essentially good. The Amara is seen almost as essentially bad. And these two are in a perennial struggle until the Nafs al-Mutma'inna wins. Again, this is a very easy model to use. We've all felt that tension within. Yeah? We felt the want to do something, and at the same time, the awareness that that is not the right thing to do. Okay? But it's always easier said than done to let the lawama win. Yeah? The whole point of it is that it's a struggle. That is what is meant by jihad al-nafs, or struggle with the self. It is that perennial struggle is one that has to be won by the lawama. But if we take a look at the nafs in the Holy Quran, we will see a slightly different picture emerging. Slightly different picture emerging. Much of what we've said already it does emerge from that same narrative, but something just slightly different I'm going to add in here. So, as we've said, the soul, this is just now looking at the Holy Quran. The soul in the Holy Quran is the mental faculty that gives rise to your desires, your cravings, and your appetites. Okay? When you look at the nafs in the Quran, it is usually connected to the verb hawiya, yeah, to desire. If you look at the Dua Kumayl we recited right now, فَغَرَّنِي بِمَا أَحْوَى, yeah? Shaitan was able to lead me the wrong way because of the desires. Yeah, so the nafs in the Quran is connected to desire. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to the Bani Israel, He blames them that whenever a messenger was sent to them or came to them, with what their souls did not desire, they rejected them. Yeah? بِمَا لَا تَهْوَى أَنفُسَكُمْ. Yeah? Against what your soul is desiring. Okay? You will also see in the Holy Quran that the nafs, or the plural of nafs, is used with another verb, which is ishtaha. Ishtaha, again, is one to indicate towards desire. When you ask what you want to eat for dinner, yeah, you ask them what from this same verb here. Okay, now the interesting thing is that human beings never get rid of their nafs. We never get rid of cravings, soul cravings. In fact, the hereafter only makes sense if we still have a nafs. Okay, so the purpose is definitely not to suppress our nafs so that we don't feel it. Yeah, that actually gives us an inhuman experience. Yeah, makes us like a robot. Why do we know that the soul remains after death? It's because we can't enjoy anything without a soul. Yeah, if we have nothing to enjoy, then we won't enjoy heaven. And if we don't want anything, then we won't feel any suffering in hell as well. So we definitely retain this soul. It's not something bad, the nafs here that I'm talking about. Okay? But before we die, yeah, it is the thing, the appetitive promptings that are put there of the nafs can lead us to violate the moral principles that we're supposed to have. And in fact can lead us to worshipping other than Allah as well. So if we look at the story of Cain and Abel, or the biblical Cain and Abel, we have فَطَوَّعَتْ لَهُ نَفْسُهُ قَتْلَ أَخِيهِ. Yeah, so his soul made it nice for him, or he followed the prompting of his soul to kill his brother. Another verb that is used is also sawwala. Yeah, sawwala means to make seem fairing. So again here, the soul, it prompts us to violate, and it also makes it seem fairing, make it seem good. Another one, like I put here in the slide, is waswasa. So the soul whispers to you. Yeah, and again, whispering and sawwala, to make seem fairing to you, are two verbs that are also used in terms of the devil as well. Okay, so shaitan, the place where shaitan can breach is the nafs. Yeah, that is the area that it can breach, and that is why it is the primary breach in human psychology where shaitan carries out his work. The soul in the Holy Quran is associated with envy, greed, and arrogance, and gratuitous complaining. Now, complaining, if you remember, and blaming is what I said the nafs al-lawama was. In the Holy Quran, we don't have an explanation of what the lawama does. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only swears by it. Okay? So gratuitous blaming is basically extra blaming. The soul keeps blaming you, keeps undermining you, keeps telling you you're not good enough, keeps working on your insecurities. Yeah? It is constantly blaming you, not only in a good way, but also in a bad way as well. Okay, this is something that emerges from a Quranic discussion about the lawama. So the lawama, like I said, in the tradition has been seen primarily just as a good thing. Okay, but blaming is not always good. Sometimes when blaming is in the right place, it's good, And if it results in repentance, it's good. Yeah? So even the vision of the nafs in the Quran, if it is resulting in repentance, it's good. But if it's going to cause anxiousness and other things like that, and doubt, then it can be seen slightly differently. And this is why a group, and if I'm correct in remembering the exact context of this, I think this is in the Battle of Uhud. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because it's in Surah Al Imran as well. So, if you can see here, their souls rendered them anxious. Yeah, is their nafs that rendered them anxious, made them anxious, and caused them to make untrue conjectures about God. Yeah? So because they were anxious and the soul did this to them, yeah, they then made untrue conjectures about God. As you can see here, وَطَائِفَةٌ قَدْ أَهَمَّتْهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ يَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ غَيْرَ الْحَقِّ. Yeah? أَهَمَّتْهُمْ أَنفُسَهُم, their souls, they became occupied, if you like, with their souls. So this is why the soul is then described as perpetually commanding towards evil. This is why it's called the nafs al-ammara, because it doesn't leave you alone. It's going to be blaming you, it's going to be prompting you to do the wrong things, and so on and so forth. It is the primary breach. Of course, like I said, there are situations where that the soul is good. And that is, for example, if it is linked with repentance. So that blaming when it comes with repentance as well. So therefore, we are not supposed to get rid of our souls. They will continually affect us. And so what the key thing for someone, or the key value that someone has to attain, is that when there is a conflict between the soul and a higher ranking moral principle, like for example, the worship of Allah or tawakkul or something like this, then we should not allow the unsettled nature of the soul to overcome us. Yeah? We have to keep the soul in check. That is the function. Yeah? It's not to get rid of the soul, but to use the other faculties, and next time, like I said, we talk about the intellect and the aql. We use those other faculties to overcome and to control the soul. That's what the purpose is. So inshallah, I hope you've found that of some benefit. And I think we've got question answers now. Inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi at-tahirin.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa
You
rahmatullah.
mentioned very good things, subject now, but we have to stop you somehow on qareen. قال أني كان لي قرين. And Surah Qaf as well. When God, He created the human being and He brings with Him the qareen. So I'd like to ask you to teach the new generation what the qareen is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My understanding of a qareen is that everybody is assigned. A qareen is someone who's very close to you. Okay? But this qareen in particular is a negative influence. Okay? So everyone is assigned with that negative influence. And so a person has to be careful. Because like I said, there's a part of us that is our nafs. And the nafs also is open to a kind of whispering. And that is what the qareen is involved with. Yeah, that kind of external force that affects the human being in a negative way. That's what the qareen is. Yeah, was that clear? Yeah?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I found interesting the way you've described the different types of nafs. So basically, from my understanding, maybe it's a traditional way, as you said, and that's been changed, but that it's different levels. So it starts with the nafs al-ammara bis-su', you get better, you get to the lawama because starting to kind of like blame you for doing the wrong and tell you you should stick to the right. And then you get to the mutma'inna. So for you saying that mutma'inna can actually be also in the wrong mutma'inna or doing the su', but still mutma'inna. So that's a very interesting thing. Can you please like explain a bit more? Because like in the Quran as well with the surah it says يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. So it was also in a positive way as mutma'inna. So.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, like I was saying, usually in the tradition, the important thing is, like you say, to win the battle between the amara and the lawama and end up at the nafs al-mutma'inna. Yeah, that's for sure. So it's not challenging that in any way. But if so for nafs al-mutma'inna means the soul that is at rest. Okay? So the soul that is at rest, when it is at rest, it could either be at rest in a positive state or at rest in a negative state. So if you look at some criminals, for example, they will commit heinous acts and be very calm about that. There's no conflict in their soul at all about that. The other thing about the nafs al-mutma'inna is that, like I said to you, this model of the amara lawama mutma'inna, it is inspired by Quranic terminology, but there is discussion. So for example, there's discussion when it comes into accuracy. So for example, a nafs al-mutma'inna, whether it is something that is achievable before death or after. Because ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna, is that before death or is this now after death? Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan maradiyah. So that model is inspired by it rather than
So basically, I think so would they like so basically if someone's they're in the blame state but they're gonna do something bad again, wouldn't they just go back to Ammara Bisu rather than getting to the Matma'inna state? That's what I mean.
yeah.
Because I did read a book about this specific topic one time and that was talking about that level. So when you improve you get to that state.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so you fall back to the Amara, yeah, like that.
And like, so the explanation of the book is like, even every level has levels within it.
Yeah.
So you can be at different levels of Amara,
Yeah.
or.
So if you like the lowest level of Amara, it's a type of complete opposite of the good mutma'inna. Yeah. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Walaikum salam.
You know when you spoke about the intellect being perfected at 40, could you please elaborate on that? And does that mean that the nafs becomes complete at age 40?
Yeah, okay, so thank you for the question. The intellect, if I remember correctly, in our traditions ends up, comes to 40. And this is also in a Quranic verse, حتى بلغ 40 سنة, I think it's فقال ربي أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي. So the age 40 is seen as an age of maturity. Yeah? Whether if you like, the intellect is fully complete. But that, of course, doesn't mean that the intellect is not present before that. It is on a journey, and it comes to that completion. And it also doesn't mean that at 40 everything's over as well, and the intellect is complete, right? It means that the natural growth of the intellect reaches a maturity at about a figurative age of 40. Yeah?
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
My question is, why do some people get tested more than others, and why do people go more than hardship than others and have it more easily?
Ahsan, that's a very good question. I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us all in different ways. There are different tests for different people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only test a person in a way that is good for them. So I'll give you an example. If, let's say, you're born into a very rich family and you don't even have to work, most of us would not look at that as a test. That seems great. But that itself is a test. And many people will fail to do the right thing in life if they have such a good situation. Yeah? Conversely, maybe on the other hand, a very difficult lifestyle would be difficult for other people to find Allah in that situation and circumstance. So because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of our different characteristics and temperaments, He gives us different tests. But that doesn't mean that He also judges us the same way. So, for example, if someone's going through a difficulty and they're successful 1%, yeah, 1% successful, it may be better than someone who's going through an easier circumstance and their success is 50%. Allah doesn't always judge things the way we do. Yeah? Sometimes a person will go through a life of lots of difficulties and just the small things they did was enough because Allah didn't give them other tests except for that. Right? Just gave them that kind of test. So the thing is to always remember when we think about tests is that Allah is like a parent who has the good outcome for his child in mind. Yeah? He will give them what is right for that child, right? And with the intention, I'm using just normal terms, with the intention of them succeeding. Yeah? With the intention of them succeeding rather than with the intention to push them down. Allah doesn't want to destroy us with tests. He wants us to succeed with the tests. So that's why everyone has different things. Allah just tests us in different ways because we're all different individuals and what is expected from us is different. Yeah?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam.
Sheikh, you said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a spirit. So what does the ayah mean when it says وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِي?
Min ruhi. So the ya here is what we call ya and nisba. Okay? So my ruh. Okay? Now because we know Allah doesn't have a ruh, because He's not body and soul. Yeah, we know He doesn't have a ruh. We understand that this ya and nisba is metaphorical. It's not literal. Yeah, it's not saying my soul because I have a soul and this is mine. Just like when we have bayti. وَطَحِّرْ بَيْتِيَ yeah, لِلطَّائِفِينَ. Yeah? So again, Allah says to Ibrahim, cleanse my house. Allah doesn't have house. Yeah? But why does He say cleanse my house? That ya and nisba is metaphorical. Yeah? Metaphorical for what? If I say if Allah attributes something to Himself, yeah, it means that whatever that thing is great, because Allah is great. Yeah? So the ya and nisba here is not saying His soul, it's saying the great soul, if you want to put it that way. Is that clear?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Salam.
So I have a question. If someone were to stray away from the deen, what would your personal advice be for them to improve their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Ahsant. I think that if a person who has, like you say, strayed away from the deen, in themselves wants to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they should do the most natural thing that comes to them. Because the honest truth is that when I look at the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the universe and created the human being, and the way He has put His religion, is that the religion of Islam is a very natural and soft religion. What comes to the moment comes to that person in that moment in terms of the realization and the internal kind of pull and understanding of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, if they do what is natural for them. So for example, if they feel like praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they feel like calling out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they do these things in the beginning, that is what will act as an anchor for them. And once they've fulfilled that, then they should seek knowledge. They should seek knowledge to understand how Allah wants them to worship Him. Yeah? I find also when this does happen, and it happens to many individuals, they go all the way one way and then they come all the way back. I find that to be a very beautiful journey. Because once a person has looked over the edge and realized they don't want what's on the other side of that, and return back, they will never go back to that edge again. Yeah, no.
We'll just end with the last question, yeah? Thank you.
So basically, any advice you give to someone who's starting like a Western psychotherapy training journey? So how to link it back to Islam, or where things maybe to stop at, or things to be aware of?
Yeah. I generally think that degrees in psychology and psychotherapy are excellent. And what I think is that as a person should be well read. So if your field is in Islamic psychology or psychotherapy, it's good to have a finger in what is being spoken about in an Islamic context. And I think what you'll find is a lot of synergy. Lots of things are going to help from the secular training, and lots of things are going to help from the Islamic perspective on it. And maybe, it's like I said in the first lecture as well, Islamic psychology is developing, and at the same time psychology is developing. So as these two fields continue to develop, there's a lot of space for a lot of creativity, in fact. Like this framework that I showed you here is only like 2022, 2023. So it's very, very early stages.
Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you so much, Sheikhna. A beautiful lecture. There will be food handed out at the exit. And inshallah, may Allah accept our a'mal. And we'll see you again next week, inshallah.